In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front brakes, pads, and rotors on this Ford E-350 with two-wheel drive. This is not the four-wheel drive model. Keep in mind when you do these brakes, it is recommended that on the back side of the rotor, you install a new wheel seal when you put it all back together. Let's get started. If your wheel has a hubcap, remove it with a pry bar on the edge here. Just be sure not to pry too far on the edge. You want to push it in a little bit, otherwise it could break. Set that aside. Use a 22mm socket to remove all 8 lug nuts and then pull the wheel off. If your wheel is stuck on, put on a lug nut so that the wheel doesn't come off, and then use a rubber mallet and tap the backside of the tire. Not the rim, you don't want to bend it, but that should make it come off. There we go. Broke free. Take off that lug nut and remove the wheel. Let's start by disconnecting the ABS wire from the brake hose so we can get a little bit more slack in it. Use a 13mm socket to remove the slider pin bolts that clamp the caliper onto the bracket. Make sure you have something to hang this with. It is fairly heavy and you do not want to let it pull on the brake hose. Sometimes it is possible that you might need a pry bar to separate this from the rotor and the pads. Take this off, set it aside. I want to compress the pistons of the caliper so I can not only retract them for the new pads, but make sure that it's a good caliper so I can continue with my brake job. Use a 3/8 socket and break the bleeder screw free. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch the fluid. I have a hose attached to a bottle that I'm going to put right here so that the fluid can go right through the hose. Now we're going to use a dual caliper depression tool to press in both of these pistons at the same time. Because my tool is actually bottoming out already, I'm going to remove one of the old brake pads and put it in here as a spacer. Take this out. Slide that pad in there. And the tool. If it takes a lot of effort to push the pistons in, most likely they're seized and you'll need a new caliper. This is going very smoothly. I'm just going to press them in. Right there they bottomed out. I'm going to remove my tool. Remove that pad that I added as a spacer. In case you did not use a hose to attach to the bleeder screw, you will most likely have a little bit of air that made it in, so just give it about 5 to 10 seconds for any air to bleed out, making sure the bleeder screw is at the top. I'm going to remove my hose and close up the bleeder screw. Make that nice and snug. If you had a rubber cap capping it off, go ahead and put that back on. I did not. Let's take out the outer pad. This one's a little bit stuck, so I'm going to use a pry bar to pry it out. Set it aside. With a 21mm socket, remove the 2 bolts holding the caliper bracket onto the knuckle. Leave this one in a few threads so it can hold it on while you remove the lower. Unthread the top one, hold that bracket. Once this is out, remove the bracket. Let's remove this cap covering our spindle nut and the bearings. Take a pry bar and a hammer, tap it off. There it is. There's a cotter pin in here that we have to straighten out and remove. Keep in mind that you do not want to reuse this, even if it looks like it's in great condition. The more you bend it, the more it's likely to break. So we're going to throw this out and install a new one. Remove this cap and the nut which should not be very tight. You'll notice the outer bearing wants to kind of fall off. The rotor tilts and moves out of the way. That's normal. Remove all of this. There's a washer here as well. I try to keep them all kind of stacked in the way that they came out, so I can make sure they go back the same way. If you take the rotor and move it, that'll push your bearing out. Make sure this doesn't fall off yet. At this point, you can take your rotor, slide it off. Make sure you have a good grip on it because it is heavy. And there's your rotor. I'm going to wipe all of this grease off. As you wipe this down, you want to inspect it to make sure it's not damaged, whether it's scratched, dented, bent, whatever it is. You never know. You want to make sure it's inspected. And this one looks very good, so we're going to leave it like this. We'll come back to add some grease once we put everything back together. Use a pry bar or a chisel, whatever you have, and a hammer, and remove this seal off of the back of the rotor. Remove your inner bearing. Now take the inner bearing. I wiped it off a little bit with a rag, and I'm just going to pack it with new grease. There was nothing wrong with this bearing, so I'm just going to add some fresh grease to it. If you have a bearing packer, you can use that. If not, you could just use, well, your glove and kind of squish that grease in. You need quite a bit of grease for this job. Make sure you have plenty on hand. Squish it in between those roller bearings. Once it comes out the other side, you know it's fully packed with grease. Try to roll this around. This will be difficult because it's slippery, but give this a couple twists. There we go. That'll get that grease worked into the bearings. And drop it in. Take some more grease and just put it right in the center here, below this bearing. This will just be a reserve of grease, basically. As the wheel bearings spin, it'll soften a little bit and it'll start slinging the grease on the bearings. There we go, just like that. A little bit on top. You basically want grease everywhere at this point. You want it covered. You don't want anything to spin dry here. Now let's install the seal on the back of the rotor. I prefer using a block of wood for this, unless you have a seal installer that's large enough to go on the outer diameter of the seal. You want to make sure it goes down and in nice and even. Looks pretty good to me right there. Give it a couple extra taps. Double check it all along the perimeter. Make sure it's seated. Looks perfect. Before you put the rotor on, make sure you pack the outer bearing as well, the same way we pack the inner bearing. That way everything is ready to go, and set it aside somewhere where you can easily reach it, because once we put that rotor on, you're going to have to put the bearing on so you can clamp it on with the nut. Otherwise it won't stay on. Make sure there's grease all throughout the bearings. Add some grease to the spindle. You don't want this to be completely dry. Add a thin layer on the thicker part, and add a little bit extra right here where it's narrower. This narrower part is going to sit basically right between the wheel bearings, so as it heats up, it will disperse and distribute onto the wheel bearings. And the reason you don't want to put a whole lot over here is because it'll actually get wiped off and pushed towards the seal when you put the rotor on with the bearing. So just focus on getting it all in this area. There we go. Bring the rotor in. Careful with that seal. Slide it over. Hold it on there. Take your outer bearing, slide it in. Seat it up against the rotor. Take the washer and the nut, tighten this up. At this point, we want to tighten up this mounting nut and squish those bearings to seat them. Of course, we're not going to leave it like that, but what you want to do is squish it, spin the rotor, squish it, spin the rotor. That seats the bearings fully on their races. Then we're going to back it off a little bit. Now you can either use an adjustable wrench, 27mm wrench, or 27mm socket. Tighten this up, just make it snug. Give the rotor a few spins. You'll notice that the mounting nut should loosen up just a little bit at this point, so you'll be able to tighten it further. As you tighten it more, the rotor will become more difficult to spin. That's normal. That's what you want to do. This seats the bearings. All right, this is becoming pretty hard to spin now, so I'm going to back it off a little bit. Right about there. It's getting easier. A little more. See how that's free spinning? That's basically what you want, but you don't want it to be too loose. You'll hear a noise difference as well in the bearings. We'll do it again, just to seat these in place. Loosen it up. What you want to do is once you think you have the wheel bearings fully seated, loosen it up to where it's finger tight, bottom it out by hand, and with the whatever tool you're using, just give it a little bit extra with no pressure on the tool. I'm just kind of pushing it with one finger until it stops spinning. That right there should be perfectly adjusted. There's a little bit of resistance in there. No play. This keeps spinning freely. That's perfect. What you want to do next is take this cap and line it up. If it doesn't line up with the castle nut slot, you could adjust the nut a little bit, or you could just flip the cap around to where it does line up based on what's easiest for you and what you think is best for the wheel bearings. Of course, like I said, you don't want them too loose. Now grab a cotter pin, slide it through the slot, and then of course bend it over to lock it in. Take the cap and tap it in. I recommend a rubber mallet so that it doesn't get damaged on the outside. We have our caliper on our workbench and we have to clean it up. Not only do we have to take the slider pins out to grease them and of course clean out the old grease. A lot of times the boots here get stuck. And you'll need some help from a pocket screwdriver. Try not to poke them, pierce them in any way. Take this out. Mine is in fairly good shape here. It's not corroded. Sometimes if the boots fail, you'll have corrosion built up in here and it'll be rusted. I also want to remove the boot completely. See that already it's starting to rust there. So I'm going to clean the boot. I'm going to clean around this ridge here so that I can seal it up very well when I put it back together. Take a little bit of brake grease or silicone paste, put it on that ridge, then put the boot back on. That grease is going to help it seal up. Next, what I will do is take some grease on that brush and add it inside of the boot. This is going to get in the folds of that boot and basically act as a reserve of grease as the slider pin goes in and out. I'm also going to apply some to the slider pin, but you can't add too much to it because it'll just get wiped off after you insert it into the bore of the caliper. Add some to this ridge here at the top. And now what you want to do is slide it right through, just like that. If there's any air built up in here that can't escape, keep it pressed in and squish the boot. That'll push it out. Give this a couple twists, make sure everything's working just fine. Do the same to the other slider pin. And once you've done that, what we also have to do is remove the anti-rattle clips that are here so we can clean underneath them, install new ones, and make sure everything is well lubricated. Sometimes you might need some pliers or a pry bar to get these out, mostly because they get really rusted in there and stuck. This one especially. You want to take a wire brush now. In some more severe cases like mine here, you might want to use a sanding disc and sand this all down. You want to remove all the corrosion and rust buildup that's here so that the pads have enough space between the bottom and the top so that they don't squish, because if they're squished together, they can't slide in and out. So it's very important that this is nice and clean because rust does swell up and that's what pushes the pads. Looks like I still have quite a bit of corrosion stuck here. Now, if the wire brush does the trick for you, that's great. But for me, I'm going to go in with a sanding disc to clean this a little bit better. With this cleaned up, use brake grease or silicone paste that is rated for brakes. You want to make sure it withstands high temperatures. And lubricate this area that you cleaned very well, but make sure it's a thin layer. If it's too much, it'll squish out when you put the anti-rattle clips on, get onto the rotor. You, of course, don't want grease on your rotor. So put the anti-rattle clips on, make sure the smaller flat hook, not the rounded one, sits on the inside. Press this down. You may need some help from some pliers to squish it on here. On the outer ridge. On the outer ridge, this hook will have to hook up and over the caliper bracket. Sometimes might need some help from a pocket screwdriver to push it up and over. You want to make sure this is completely bottomed out. Then we'll do the same on this side, just like that. This side I was able to push by hand, but as you can see, not all the way. So, there we go. Push this on, and at this point, you want to flip it over, do the same thing to the other side. Take the caliper bracket and install it on the knuckle. Have the bolts ready so you can secure it on here. Thread these on. Let's bottom them out, and the torque for them is going to be 195 foot-pounds. Put the pads in, slide them kind of at an angle. It'll be the easiest way to get them started in here. Neither of them have a wear indicator in this case, so it doesn't matter which one goes on the outside or the inside. Make sure your pads move smoothly and freely. This is what I was mentioning earlier. If it's not cleaned enough underneath the anti-rattle clips, it'll squish the pads down and they can't perform as they should. Next, you want to grab your caliper, slide it right over. Line it up with the two pins. Have your bolts ready to start them in. Doesn't matter which one you start first, just put one in so you can let go and start in the other one. "27 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these bolts. I have a little bit of brake fluid running down the caliper from when we compressed the piston, so I'm going to clean this off, that way I don't confuse it for a potential leak in the future. Use brake parts cleaner for this. Let's put the ABS wire back into the brake hose retaining clips. Just press it in. Make sure it's secured in place so that it doesn't get caught on the wheel or anything else. There we go. Let's put the wheel back on. Put back all 8 lug nuts. Snug them up in a cross pattern to seat that wheel. And then also in a cross pattern, we're going to torque these to 148 foot-pounds. A 148 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Here we go. Double check them if you want. There you have it. Now install the hubcaps if your vehicle had some. And when you do this, you want to make sure that you line up this cutout here with the valve stem. And there you have it. Job is done. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.